You're listening to the Kelly Green Hour for the Always Next Year Podcast Studio Network. You can find the team on our Twitter, at ANY Podcast, or visit us on our website, www.alwaysnextyearpodcast.com. And now, to bring us in, the Jackdaws.
A fighting man I used to be, revered and feared through Killarney. Now I'm back to hitching with the wind. But if Mickey Flynn should ever find me, I'll throw me caution all behind me and square off on that son of a bitch again. He cracked open a river too, he beat me Sunday through and through, and such over my unconscious frame. I won me healthy sheriff fights, well lucky son, still happy life since Mickey Flynn beat me dumb and lame.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a second consecutive Victory Green Hour as the Philadelphia Eagles head towards the bye week. Next week, we get to celebrate yet another Victory Green Hour, and I am your host, Connor Donald. And I know what you may be thinking. Where is LJ? Well, LJ had a emergency of sorts that he has to deal with tonight, so it's just going to be me. But lucky for me, we had a guest lined up, so you don't have to listen to 45 minutes of me talking about the Eagles, which would probably be boring as all hell. I have brought a guest along for me, and what makes it even better is the guest is from Canada as well. So this is an all-Canadian Eagles Kelly Green Hour. How exciting. What an awesome opportunity for the Always Next Year listeners. So my guest tonight is Travis. Travis is the co-creator and co-host of the True North Fantasy Football podcast and website. An absolutely awesome, funny podcast and a really great website. They put out some awesome content, written content, Twitter content, and of course the podcast. They give some great fantasy football insight with some stereotypical Canadian flair and undertones. So I know he works with his buddy Terrell, and they work really hard at all of this. So it is awesome to get the opportunity to get to talk to you, Travis, and to have you join along. I don't know if I did you justice with that intro, but welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. That intro was perfect. I couldn't have done it better myself. And, just happy to be able to represent the flag up here in Canada. And it's been a pleasure to share some Eagles fandom with you.
Absolutely. We're always looking for some new guests. And so this is an absolute pleasure to have you aboard for this episode. So first of all, I guess before we get into the whole reason for this show, the Victory Green Hour, just before we went on the air, probably a couple of hours ago, we got some devastating news that Deshaun Jackson, the seemingly plug that keeps this offense going, will more than likely be done for the season as his abdomen injury, hernia, whatever they're calling it. Last I saw a report by John Clark saying that the muscle came right off the bone. So what is true of this? I don't know, because what do we believe of anyone who reports on medical stuff for the Philadelphia Eagles? I just don't know who to trust anymore. So whatever this injury is, he has now opted for surgery, which was also an option in week 2 after the injury took place. So Travis, what are your thoughts on this chaotic injury, this chaotic situation? It seems like the chaos is constantly happening and it revolves around our medical staff. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you said it pretty well there. The surgery is happening now. He most likely isn't going to play again this season. And the sports hernia, I mean, if he were to have surgery in week 2, then he would have been back fully healed by now. But I guess he decided he didn't want to have surgery. So, it was already the 6-week timetable plus now. So it's a big hit to the offense. It's kind of funny. We kind of grew to rely on him as a really important piece of this offense before we even had him grow into a really important piece of this offense this year. So we're going to miss Djax. I think, we haven't really had him. So we're going to have to keep plugging away without him.
Yeah, and I mean, plugging away is a really good word for it because it's painful. I mean, we witnessed it against the Bears. the issues, the regression, whatever we want to call it, with Nelson Aguilar and Alshon Jeffrey is scary. And I mean, I guess let's just touch on it quickly. How would you address this situation? Is there a free agent out there that intrigues you? Obviously, a lot of people are talking about Antonio Brown. Some people talking J.J. Nelson, Michael Crabtree. Who would you address this with, or do you think we're good just going forward with who we have?
It's a tough one. I think they have a little bit of option there. We haven't really seen what JJ Arcega-Whiteside's going to bring to the table yet. He kind of got doghoused after that big drop in the Lions game. I thought about Antonio Brown, but I don't think they're going to do that. I think it's just a bit of a circus. But on the flip side of that, I could see him gelling well with a nice guy quarterback like Carson Wentz, but we wouldn't really want him to kind of ruin Carson Wentz, right? So we're not going to go AB, but I think personally it should come from within. I've heard Jordan Matthews, and that's kind of a within move because he's been there, and I think he showed a little bit when he came in last year late in the season, but I think they just need to give JJ Arcega-Whiteside a shot. Maybe even bring Greg Ward off the practice squad. They got to do something. I want them to change their approach, try something new, because we're getting pretty close to the definition of insanity here.
Yeah, that is definitely a good way of putting it. That we are pretty much, as fans, we have been driven to insanity, and as a team, we have basically become insane because we're just accepting week in and week out the same thing with this wide receiving core, which was supposed to be the number one in the whole league. But it clearly goes to show how important Deshaun Jackson was to this, and how little Carson Wentz trusts the rest of his wide receivers. I mean, it's really kind of sad to see. But I mean, AB, I mean, we saw him trying to turn that new leaf in New England, and it was working until that second report came out. Then it ruffled some feathers a bit more than they wanted. And I mean, looking at it from the outside right now, I have heard nothing about that situation since. It is literally just the NFL's way of getting people they don't like out, apparently. But I've heard Jordan Matthews too. I'm okay with that. He can do it all. He showed he can be a speed receiver. He showed he can work the slot. He showed he can work anywhere on the field. I would like to see more from JJ Arcega-Whiteside. I mean, I've been praising him all day on Twitter, and I mean, I don't think he's been given a fair shake because he's too much like Alshon Jeffrey. No, he's not going to be a speed guy, but maybe you could develop a game plan around Alshon Jeffrey, JJ Arcega-Whiteside, and our two monster tight ends. But, I mean, we could beat this Deshaun Jackson thing to death, but I think disappointment is a really good word for what fans are feeling right now, because it's frustrating. Disappointment and frustration are probably two really good words if I were to use words to describe this situation right now. Because if he had this surgery back in week 1 after the injury, or week 2, or even wait a couple weeks, seeing what happened, he probably could have returned by the end of the season to help us with a potential playoff run. But instead, we lose him for this season. Maybe back for the playoffs, but at this point, we would be better off testing free agency and seeing what we can get there.
Yeah, you can't rely on him to be back for that. That's for sure. You got to go with the fact that you're not going to have him this season, and some of the free agent options might not be very exciting, very inspiring options, but you got to mix it up somehow. And if that's bringing in a guy off the street to get some snaps, then that's what they got to do.
Absolutely. So now that we got that depressing topic out of the way, let's move on to a much happier but somewhat frustrating Chicago Bears game. The Philadelphia Eagles ended up beating the Chicago Bears 22-14, thanks in large part to Mitch Trubisky being Mitch Trubisky and having absolutely zero quarterbacking ability whatsoever. This game really felt like a tale of two halves, kind of. I mean, the Chicago Bears had nothing going in the first half. I think after one quarter, or maybe it was even the half, they had like -1 yard. I think it was after the first quarter they had -1 yard to our like 150. So it was ugly for the Chicago Bears. They couldn't get a run game going. They couldn't get a pass game going. They couldn't get they could not get any sort of stop on defense because Doug Peterson literally took two insanely methodical and long drives, a 6 minute and 33-second and a 7 minute and 15-second one, and ran down a ton of clock, but only got field goals out of it. What were your thoughts at the start of the game? We forced the Bears to punt twice on 3-and-outs where they got 1 yard and -2 yards. And then we had these long methodical drives that ended in typical Eagles fashion with field goals.
Yeah, I mean, I liked how they came out. They came out aggressive. They had a 4th down conversion on the opening drive, which was really cool. You like to see them get points because they haven't been doing that well on the opening drives this season. I think you said it. They just kind of needed to punch them in. They had 12 play drives on both of those, and they came away with six points. So there's definitely some room for improvement there. But, they were running the no huddle. They had some pre-snap motion going on. They were working it really nicely in the quick passing game. One thing I really like to see is that they did a good job at keeping Khalil Mack at bay for the most part as well. He didn't have any sacks on the day, so that was good to see from Dillard on the left side and the offensive line overall for sure. And to your point there, the Bears actually had negative total yards until about a minute left in the first half. So I don't know if that's an indictment on the Bears offense or the Eagles defense, but that's definitely what you want to see as a Birds fan.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to throw the Eagles under the bus here because I do think that the defense played extremely well. The secondary looked when you could see them because the play was usually right at the line and following Mitch Trubisky. But when you could see the secondary, they were playing really well considering Allen Robinson's had a really good season. But when all was said and done, really, I think it's more of an indictment on the offense and Mitch Trubisky and Matt Nagy. Matt Nagy, who was supposed to be the next Sean McVay, and now Matt Nagy can barely produce points. He can barely produce yards. Forget about points. He can barely produce yards for this team. And you know what? You want to say that it's Trubisky, but I think it's equal Trubisky and equal Nagy. I mean, Matt Nagy's trying to call a game for Trubisky. He used the wrong running back for the majority of the season already, and he just suddenly realized, oh, look at this nice shiny toy I have in David Montgomery. But, I mean, the defense was great. I mean, I can't knock the defense. The defense did what they did, being given what they were given, which was a completely sour and porous offense to play against. But I mean, it was ugly. It was ugly. As a Bears fan, that's hard to watch. That first half was really, really hard to watch. And to your point on Dillard, I think Dillard did a really great job as a rookie. This was a game where you had to come out, where you had to prove yourself. And did he ever prove himself? I mean, he looked really good. You can't say enough good things about him. They did say they're going back to Jason Peters, which is fine. We can live with that because we like Jason Peters too. But we know what we got in Andre Dillard now. So that is an extra positive from seeing him face Khalil Mack. He faced Robert Quinn and he faced Everson Griffin in the last 3 weeks without Jason Peters. That's some pretty elite pass rushing company right there to face. So we have to feel good about what we have when Jason Peters chooses to retire, if he chooses to retire, because looks like a machine. But now, let's talk Howard and Sanders. This was a Howard revenge game. We always talk about revenge games, and boy, did Howard take that to heart. What were your thoughts on Howard and Sanders, this seemingly thunder and lightning combo that week in and week out makes us look like suddenly a run-first offense?
Yeah, I think they're being used perfectly as a tandem, to be honest with you. Miles Sanders has looked fantastic in the pass game. They were lining him up outside. They were moving him all around the formations. And then Jordan Howard, he was just smashing into guys whenever he hit the second level. He looked really, really good. He was hitting the lanes really well. And I think, the improvement in the offensive line, they're playing much better than they did early in the season. I think that's been a huge help. But overall, like, the running back tandem has not been a problem whatsoever. I think they're kind of settling into defined roles, and Doug Peterson's using them really, really nicely right now.
Absolutely. I mean, Sanders is reminiscent of a Tariq Cohen, but a Tariq Cohen with size, I think. He can be moved all around. He can do a whole bunch of different things for you, but he's got the size. Whereas Tariq Cohen, I find the size just isn't there. So he's elusive in being small, but I mean, it's kind of like Darren Sproles. It's a touchy subject. I like the fact that having Miles Sanders. I think Jordan Howard has proven he's deserving of an extension and should not be a rental. If Howie Roseman is disappointed in season, so it would be really nice if in season he could lock down Jordan Howard with some sort of an extension to give us some faith back in Howie, some trust in Howie Roseman. I think the defense definitely looked dominant. We talked to methodical, smart plays. The second quarter, pretty boring. There was a bunch of punting, and then the half ended. So it was a pretty boring second quarter. But then we move in to the third quarter and the second half of the game, where the game script seemingly flipped on the Philadelphia Eagles. They opened the half with a nice drive that led to a touchdown to put them up 19-0, and then we started punting and Chicago started playing football. What were your thoughts about the second half?
Yeah, I think you got to give credit to the Bears defense. They definitely tightened it up coming into the second half. After that touchdown run from Jordan Howard to open it up, the Eagles punted on every single drive until that last minute field goal. So the Bears defense, I think, the first half kind of made us forget a little bit how good this Bears defense was, but they came out in the second half to play. I think the Eagles were just kind of lucky that the Bears offense is pretty bad. The Bears had two big plays. They had that Gabriel catch for 53 yards, and then they had that David Montgomery reception over the middle where he was just like ridiculously wide open. Other than that, the Bears only had 4 plays that were over 10 yards the entire game, and they were all in the second half. So their offense picked it up a little bit, but I think that the Eagles defense might have got a little bit lazy in kind of thinking that Mitch Trubisky wasn't going to do anything. It's just nice that they kind of held on, but you got to give credit to the Bears defense for shutting down the Eagles offense in the second half.
Yeah, and I mean, when you get ahead 19-0 like that, you can't, as the Eagles, have we not yet learned that we can't take any lead for granted? We start slow or we start fast, but when we start fast, we end slow. We can never see. A lot of people were tweeting that this felt reminiscent of, I think it was the Carolina Panthers game last year, where we had an amazing first half, and then the second half came and Carolina just picked away at the lead, and to the point that they ended up winning the game. So a lot of people were tweeting out this feeling of the sentiment of that game last season, and it was like, oh please, we need this, because with the Patriots coming up and the Seahawks coming up, the Bears was a much needed victory, because I find it hard to believe that we're taking those next 2 games from the Patriots and the Seahawks. And I'm generally an optimistic guy, but the Seahawks have looked really good and the Patriots have looked, well, the New England Patriots. This is no real words to describe them. We just they're Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. They're a machine. And that defense has looked incredible, whereas our offenses look like complete garbage. So I want to address Nelson Aguilar and Alshon Jeffrey have not looked good. They have seemingly regressed, and the drops are becoming concerning, and they seem to be really holding back the offense. And there was a couple key plays in the second half where they were drops by Aguilar, drops by Jeffrey. Just looks like they're giving up on plays. This is concerning because Carson Wentz needs weapons. Carson Wentz is ranking in the top 5 in almost every single category often as a quarterback. So we are doing him absolutely zero justice. He could be having that MVP 2017 caliber season if he had the weapons out there that he needed. But those weapons just aren't there. What are your thoughts on Aguilar and Jeffrey and the game that they put forward?
Yeah, it's kind of more of the same, not very good. This passing offense just kind of lacks a level of excitement, the level that we thought Djax was going to bring. But, I mean, Alshon had 3 more drops. I personally don't think he's being used very well. I think they're using him on a lot of slants and screen passes, and that's not really his game. I mean, the screen is good if you need 2 yards, but you're not getting much more than those 2 when it comes to Alshon. And as far as Nelson Aguilar, I'm just kind of done with Nelson Aguilar. He doesn't have that much effort. There was a couple of plays where he could have gone up and used his body and put it on the line this past game, and he just didn't do it. And then there's those hands. It's not a good combo, bad effort and bad hands. So I'm kind of done with Nelson Aguilar, and I hope they can find some other option to, replace that production, because I think he's probably still going to end up getting those snaps. He was the most used receiver on the Eagles as far as snap count. So he probably will get those snaps because of his slot play, but they need to replace those. They need to move those targets elsewhere within this offense, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he is getting an insane snap share, but that's because he plays the slot. He can move around the backfield. He can do a lot of things, but catching the ball just does not seem one of those things. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's definitely concerning. But I mean, we have to figure something out at that wide receiver position. It's unfair to Carson Wentz for him to be putting up numbers that could be MVP numbers if he had the right weapons. And you mentioned those plays by Aguilar where it just looked like he tried to draw the penalty or the flag versus trying to make the catch. Like elite pass catchers or good pass catchers will go for the ball because more often than not, you're going to get the call if you go for the ball. If you give up on the play and just go for the body, it looks ugly. And those couple of plays, they looked ugly. Those didn't look like penalties. Those looked like a guy trying really hard to draw a penalty. And it didn't work. And it shows why, because when you look at the slow motion replays, you sit there and you're like, just go for the ball.
Totally.
Don't go for the body. Don't make that contact.
Yeah, I mean, he can make those plays. Like he can
We've
go
seen
up and put his hands in the air instead of just leaving his hands down and putting his shoulder into the defender who has better positioning than he does, right? It's infuriating almost. It's just stop being soft and go up for the ball, It's hard to watch.
No, definitely. But at the end of this all, they muffed the final kickoff, which after the field goal, which put us up by 8, they would have left a very, very limited amount of time left for Mitchell Trubisky. I believe it would have been 25, less than 30 seconds, I think, for Mitch Trubisky to try and make something happen. And he, well, obviously, probably more than likely was not going to make anything happen, but I would not put it by the Philadelphia Eagles to play the sticks defense and give up the yardage and the plays and potentially put Trubisky in that position. But I honestly think one of the biggest takeaways from this was the defense looked really good, and I think Jim Schwartz actually called one of his better defensive games this season. I mean, he called a fairly decent game against Green Bay. I noticed a lot of the time the secondary was playing up instead of 8 or 9 yards off. That could, like we said, speak to the Chicago Bears offense and saying we have confidence Trubisky may target these people, but we have confidence that we're not getting burnt by these people. So I felt Jim Schwartz actually had a really good game, whereas he's been catching a lot of flack recently for play calling and for the way his secondary plays. So, I mean, it was good. I mean, it was nice the way that Jake Elliott, that kick at the end of the game, that looked good. His celebration was awesome. Really, it made me laugh in a game where I was holding my heart for the final 30 minutes. So, I mean, if there was one big takeaway for me beyond the Andre Dillard point that we drove home, I really think that Jim Schwartz and the defense had a really good game, and they really needed that to boost their confidence heading into the bye week and facing two of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat there. I think it's nice to get all these DBs back healthy. Tim Jernigan was nice to get back healthy. So that's kind of my big takeaway is at full health, this defense can look good. We just need to rely on Jim Schwartz to coach them up. And we need them to kind of find those guys that are going to play for them in as far as corners and stick with those guys to give them confidence. Because I think the DBs, defensive backs just need confidence and swagger when they're going to play. And you got to leave them on the field if you want them to, play that way.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's the big thing. Like Rasul Douglas, a lot of people bash him for getting burnt, but he's not one of those guys who can play 8, 10 yards off and then make a play. He's going to be that guy who bites on the double move or gets burnt. Whereas if he can be up at the line and has that 5 yards to be aggressive and push and pull, he can really slow down a receiver and slow down a play. And I think Jalen Mills is similar. We have a lot of really aggressive DBs, and they need to be up on that line, taking advantage of the 5 yards that the refs usually give you, that leeway to be aggressive, to push and pull and kind of get the upper hand, slow down the play for a couple seconds, and allow your defensive line to create the pressure. And that's one of the issues I think that the defensive line is having beyond the injuries, is they're not being given the time to make a play or to apply pressure, because the ball's already out of the quarterback's hands because someone's been burnt, or they just do simple curl routes or slant routes where the ball is easily out of the quarterback's hands within 2 or 3 seconds. So I think that play style that they use against the Bears should definitely be used against these two teams coming up, especially when you're facing a guy like Tyler Lockett and a guy like Julian Edelman, Mohamed Sanu, possibly Josh Gordon. You need to be aggressive with those guys. You have to play up on those guys and hope you don't get burnt once those 5 yards pass, or hope that your defensive line applied enough pressure. But I guess essentially that's the game in a nutshell. What would be your play of the game?
This one, I was kind of thinking there was two plays that were really standouts. One of them was obviously the Ertz touchdown. It was really good to see Zach Ertz get going. I think that was only his second touchdown on the season, so it's nice to see him get into the end zone and get some rhythm. It was his first time being targeted more than 10 times since week 2, and we have seen a little bit of dip in his production. So I think seeing him get involved in the game, I think big picture for this offense, that was a really important play. But as far as on the game level, I think the biggest play was probably that third down conversion from Dallas Goedert, the screen play. Jason Kelsey on the broadcast, the announcer, I think it was Mark Schlereth, showed a really good clip where Jason Kelsey's out there looking for a guy to block, and he almost sees behind him, comes back, blocks a guy down to spring Goddard to get that first down. And I think that's kind of what sealed it, was that screenplay to Dallas Goedert.
Yeah, honestly, those were two big plays for me. Those are probably the two plays that I would have chosen. I know it was the last play of the game, but I also think that a big play of the game was that Jake Elliott, the kick. It wrapped the knuckles of the Chicago Bear player, and it stopped any potential game-winning drive with those 30 seconds that the Bears could have put together. And I think that was huge because we were having a rough second half. So a play like that skips our way was definitely much needed, even though there was only 30 seconds left in the game. And we're sitting there and laughing because, it's just Mitch Trubisky. Yeah, but you just never know. So it was nice to see a bounce go our way and us get on top of that ball, and not allow Mitch Trubisky any sort of time, and just being able to kneel that clock out after a pretty high stress second half for us. Now, who would you give your game ball to?
I think my game ball is going to go to Zach Ertz. Like I said, he is a huge part of this offense, and when he gets going, I think the rest of the offense gets going. I think we saw this season when teams can key on him and shut him down. It makes it pretty tough on them with this wide receiver group. So I'm going to give it to Zach Ertz just because it's his first game over 100 this year. He got the touchdown, and that was a big part of their win, was that first half touchdown.
Absolutely. I have Zach Ertz in a ton of fantasy leagues, so that just made me breathe a massive sigh of relief, because I'm like, okay, good, he has trust in him again. Hopefully he keeps going there and he gets targeted like he did last season, but you never know. But yeah, Zach Ertz was definitely a big player in this game, but I'm going Jordan Howard. Jordan Howard revenge game. He had a big game for us. He came up big with the touchdown. He had lots of yards. When he's called upon to block, he was in the back blocking. He made plays. Jordan Howard took that revenge game to heart, and he said, "You guys sold me for a 6th-round pick, and I'm going to make you pay for it." And boy, did he make them pay for it. So I'm giving the game ball to Jordan Howard. But my other one that was up for debate was Brandon Graham, because during the first half, Brandon Graham was all over that backfield, making plays and putting pressure in Mitch Trubisky's face. And Trubisky, he's not a very good quarterback with or without pressure, but when you apply pressure, it makes it 10 times easier on the rest of the defense. So Brandon Graham was a close second place for me. But seeing Zach Ertz back as part of the offense was definitely huge. Another thing I want to address in this game before we move on to a bye week to-do list is Doug Peterson. Are you concerned with his play calling? Do you think it's his play calling holding Carson Wentz back, or do you think there's a different mixture there? Week in and week out, I think that Doug Peterson has to outcoach and prove he's a better coach. He had to do it against Jason Garrett. He couldn't do it. He had to do it against Matt Nagy. He almost didn't do it. He had to do it against a lot of coaches. He's just had to be the better coach. He's had to call the better game. And he's had a lot of games that were really close. He had to outcoach Dan Quinn, who's literally, I have no clue how he still has a job, and he got outcoached by Dan Quinn. Are you concerned about Doug Peterson and his play calling?
Not yet. There have been some instances where my eyebrows have been raised, that's for sure. I think, he's not able to be as creative as he once was with the weapons that he has right now, because he doesn't know who he can rely on and put in those situations where he can scheme up for one guy. There's not really a guy aside from Zach Ertz and maybe the running backs who he can do that for. So he's a little bit limited there. But I do, there have been some situations like the first drive of this game in week 9. They ended up with a field goal. They passed on second and third and goal. And I think if they would have run it on second and goal, the running game was going. I think, it could have got him down to the 1 and with a chance for a sneak or an easier touchdown. So there are certain instances where I question, what was that play call? Much like some of those screenplays to Alshon Jeffrey, they just overdo that, it seems. So, I want to see him be a little bit more creative, but I think his guys need to step up and, allow him to rely on them to use them in that way as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with Carson Wentz and just building rapport and building confidence with these guys again. It just doesn't feel like the Carson Wentz who was taking these receivers out. I can't remember what they did. They went hunting together or something one year. It just doesn't feel like that. It just doesn't have that feel of Carson Wentz supporting his receivers through tough times. And because Carson Wentz doesn't have that confidence, Doug Peterson is not having that confidence, and he's not making the play calls that might really show Carson Wentz's full repertoire of weapons off, like his arm and all those things. I mean, we've seen the arm, we know he can throw, but he doesn't like to do it often because it just feels like he doesn't have faith in those receivers. It feels like he feels a lot more confident if he can throw before the sticks and have these big guys like Sanders or Ertz or Goddard just get to the line and get that first down and then keep rolling from there. So I would like to see some more aggressive play calling, because I think going forward there's some big games he's up against Bill Belichick, he's up against Pete Carroll. I think Doug Peterson definitely needs to be the better coach. He needs to really be aggressive, and he needs to just trust Carson Wentz and trust the weapons he has. If they don't choose to address the wide receiver position or any other weapons, he has to trust who he has. And because Howie's clearly trusting him to run that offense and to do something with Carson Wentz, the $30 million arm. So I think we have to allow him to do something. You have to allow Wentz to do something. Pearson just has to go back to being aggressive, because it just feels like he's calling a completely different game from when he had Nick Foles running the offense. And it's frustrating because Carson Wentz is better than Nick Foles. And I know many may disagree, or many may just be too in love and infatuated with the fact that Foles brought us a Super Bowl, but it's the truth. Carson Wentz is better than Nick Foles. So you should be able to call an equally aggressive game or a similar game that leads to Eagles' success in my eyes.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Carson Wentz is by far better than Nick Foles. I think he's, in my opinion, one of the most talented quarterbacks in the NFL, especially the way he evades pressure. And you're totally right. That free and loose feeling just doesn't quite seem there just yet. So hopefully they can develop that going into the season. And you mentioned kind of the way that he doesn't trust guys. I think, being a fantasy guy, I looked into a bunch of stats going in here, and a really telling stat to your point there was that Alshon Jeffrey has only been targeted more than 15 yards on 11 of his 55 targets. So it's just, he doesn't trust putting the ball in the air and letting Alshon go up and get it. And obviously you can't trust Aguilar. So I think if he can build some of that going into the back half of the season here, I think we're in a pretty decent spot to make a playoff push.
Absolutely. I mean, after these next two games, the schedule becomes a hell of a lot easier. I think we got the Redskins, we got the Giants, I think we have the Dolphins and the Jets,
Yep.
and the Cowboys, which the Cowboys is a coin flip game as it always is. So, I mean, we could easily have 5 straight wins that we can rattle off after the Seahawks in 3 weeks. So it's really important that I think we need to get 1 win out of these next 2 games, and then we can have a real safe shot at 11-5, 10-6, and the Cowboys schedule gets more difficult. They get what we got in the middle more at the end. So we may have a very good chance of making it into the playoffs, because looking at the standings in the NFC right now, I do not think 2 NFC East teams are making the playoffs. I do not think an NFC East team gets a wild card. It's going to be by winning that division, because there are some really strong teams in the NFC. The NFC is competitive. It is going to be extremely interesting to see who ends up making it, who ends up being able to get in and find a way to get in, because I think we're going to see a lot of 11-5, 12-4 teams in the NFC this year, and it's scary for the NFC East, because we're just not looking like we're at the level where we can compete with the Green Bays, the Seattles, the New Orleans. Those teams just seem ahead of us, and that's why we need to get the division. We need to win the division.
Yeah, that matchup against Dallas is going to be massive at the end of the season. And I think you're totally right. In my opinion, there's going to be 2 teams coming out of the West and 2 teams coming out of the North. And then, it's kind of a crapshoot from there once you get into the playoffs, but they just have to make it. And I think, with Dallas looking pretty good, unfortunately, this season, it's probably going to take 10 wins just to secure it. 9 could go to a tiebreaker, which is why that last game is really, really important. But it's going to be a tough slate. So they need to get those wins that they're supposed to get and maybe sneak one out on these next 2, like you said.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, we are heading into the bye week. So obviously we talked to Sean Jackson, we talked Doug Peterson, Carson Wentz, the issues with the weapons, the defense starting to look like a really cohesive unit. What are a couple of things on your bye week to-do list heading into the second half of the season, which we already have mentioned a couple times is going to be huge? So what's on your to-do list for Howie, Doug Peterson, Carson Wentz, for anybody?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll start with the offense. I think they need to keep the focus on the run game. Quietly, they have the 5th most rushing attempts in the league. And I think we've seen that when that running game's going, it really helps out the offense. So I want them to keep doing that. Keep, pounding Jordan Howard. I think the offense changed when they consistently started giving him work. So that's going to be a big key for me. And then we've already talked about it a bunch. I want them to work to find a spark at the wide receiver position. I think Zach Ertz still needs to be a focal point, but when he gets neutralized, they're in a really tough spot. So we already talked about them bringing somebody in, and I'm all for it. It can come from within, though. Even Charles Johnson, potentially, who was in the AAF for a little bit. He looked good in the preseason. Greg Ward looked good in the preseason. And of course, JJ Arcega-Whiteside looked really good. So I think they really need to work to find a spark at the wide receiver position to complement Zach Ertz in the passing game.
Absolutely. I mean, we know we can lean on our running game, but that's one of my bye week to-do lists. You got to find a spark. You got to find a weapon. You got to make people uncomfortable. It feels like Nelson Aguilar and Alshon Jeffrey are just too comfortable in their positions, and they're just comfortable with failure or mediocrity at that position. So you need to find a burner. You got to find a spark plug that's going to say, you better stop feeling safe because we got a lot of young weapons. So you can easily, we know Aguilar's gone. He's going to be off the books, a $9 million waste this year. Well, Alshon Jeffrey is set to probably be the highest paid player. I think he's the highest or top 3 next year. And we can easily move on from that if a young player proves themselves. So like you said, JJ Arcega-Whiteside, huge. I don't care if Doug Peterson thinks that Alshon Jeffrey and him are too alike and Jeffrey deserves the touches. No, Jeffrey does not deserve the touches right now. They deserve a more of a 50-50 split on the snap count. And whoever can make magic, whoever can make plays is the one you lean on in that game. So, yeah, you got to find, like you said, Greg Ward, you mentioned Charles Johnson. They work. They're burners. Those are those guys. Greg Ward, he's going to sprint down the field, and he'll look back when he knows he's ran far enough and the ball might be headed in his direction. He's that type of guy. He's a Deshaun Jackson-like player, not as fast, hasn't been given the opportunity to full-on prove himself. But he's one option that I would definitely look towards. I've seen people saying, what about other practice squads? If you can find a good burner receiver on a practice squad that you think is worthwhile to bring on, that's better than Greg Ward or that's better than Charles Johnson, go ahead and do it. But I think we have to Doug Peterson has to make people uncomfortable because it feels like people are getting too comfortable in their role and too comfortable in just being mediocre receivers. You got to split Aguilar's time, split Jeffrey's time. Miles Sanders cannot be our best receiver in the second half of the season. As great as it is, I just don't want that. I love it, but I don't want it. I want a receiver to be our best receiver or a tight end to be our best receiver. But you kind of alluded to it. Even Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz has to take some more importance. He has to be front seat, driving that offense again. He has to be getting the targets. And Wentz just has to find a way to get that ball there with Ertz because, yeah, there's some double teams, but sometimes it's just Carson Wentz not taking that extra second to double check the field before he throws the ball. So, I mean, definitely the big to-do list is something at the receiver position. For Howie, he's not big on doing big things this season for some reason, so it doesn't have to be, you don't have to splash with Antonio Brown or Michael Crabtree. It could be a Greg Ward. It could be a Charles Johnson, or it could be stealing someone you're high on from somebody else's practice squad. But something definitely has to change there on the offensive side of the ball. On the defensive side of the ball, for me, I think Jim Schwartz has to really look back at this game against the Chicago Bears. He has to really look back at these last 2 weeks and the games that he's called in the last 2 weeks. I mean, I know that the Bills game was helped heavily by the weather, but I think he has to look back at this game and say, I like what my secondary did there. I have to have more confidence in my secondary. Jim Schwartz has to just look back and see the games where he's called really well and where he's given the secondary that extra yardage. They're playing right up on the line or they're playing just a couple yards off, and they're able to give up so much more time for that defensive line to make things happen. Allow Fletcher Cox, Barnett, Graham to create pressure, create havoc, and make a rushed pass. And that all it takes is that couple of seconds at the line where you get handsy, and that could be all the time that they need on that defensive line. So I think Jim Schwartz has to look back at this game. Forget that it was Mitchell Trubisky at quarterback. Just look at that game and look at what your secondary did. And definitely lean on a similar play call going forward and having some faith in your secondary.
Yeah, that's kind of what I have for my notes as far as the defense as well, is just coach them up. I think they've got some health coming back. Rodney McLeod's been back and playing well for a couple weeks. Tim Jernigan came back this past week, and then all of those corners are healthy to the point that actually Sidney Jones was a healthy scratch in week 9. But they got talent in that DB group. They just need to get coached up properly. And I think that's somewhere where Schwartz has lacked recently. But I mean, Darby, Mills, Rasul Douglas, Avonte Maddox, Sidney Jones, there's some tools there. I think they just need to be used properly. And I think we saw that a little bit with Jalen Mills coming in. He gets dogged a lot for his double move coverage, but I think he's a really good cover corner. He's just a little bit over aggressive sometimes, obviously on the double moves. And sometimes, he's right in position, but he goes up to make a play on the ball and he just doesn't quite get there because maybe the receiver's bigger than him. But I think, he's got a lot of skills. And I think we saw that he was a big boost for the secondary against Allen Robinson this past week.
Absolutely. I think our DBs just need to be coached up. They just need to have, like you said, be coached up and just have confidence. If Jim Schwartz has confidence and lets them play their game or their style of game, I think that the defense could get some leaps and bounds this second half. They could just be a whole different defense. And like I said, I mean, the defensive line has struggled. They've been beaten there. They've been applying pressure. They've been beating the person on the other side of the ball, the tackle they're against, but they just haven't been able to make those sacks sometimes count. That extra couple of seconds is all it could take for them. One other question before we end the show. This Saturday is the deadline for Andrew Sendejo being able to be cut and us recouping a 4th round compensatory draft pick. Do you pull the trigger if you're Howie Roseman? Do you go out and get yourself a receiver and cut Andrew Sendejo and recoup that pick? Or do you keep Andrew Sendejo for the rest of the season for his veteran presence?
See, that's tricky because his on paper production hasn't been crazy, but I think, when we have seen his name called, you can kind of see that he is kind of one of those wily vets that you do like to keep around. It's kind of tricky. I think with Rodney McLeod coming back, I might make the move just to get that pick back because we've seen what some teams can do with a 4th round pick. Maybe not so much the Eagles lately, but you never really know when you're going to hit on one of those picks. So I think as far as the net gain from having Sendejo, 4th round pick's a pretty nice return on that.
Absolutely. I'm on board. It's like trading Sendejo for a 4th round pick. Absolutely, Howie. Let him go. And if you have to move because of a crowded cornerback room, if you have to move Rasul Douglas or somebody else up to safety once in a while to help out and to be that extra safety, I'm on board. I'm on board because you, just like we kind of alluded to with Rasul Douglas a little while ago, Rasul Douglas can be aggressive. Rasul Douglas, sometimes it's better if he has that extra time to see the play unfold and just make a good hard tackle or make a good hard play on the ball. So I am 100% on board for trading Sendejo for that comp pick again. So, Travis, it has been an absolute pleasure. And hopefully, maybe later this season, maybe even next season, we'll get you back on with LJ because I'm sure LJ would absolutely love. Actually, I know he loves to talk with other Eagles fans and he loves the opportunity to debate if we disagree on something. So I would love to have you on again. I'll give you 30 seconds. This is a completely shameless push of the True North Fantasy Football group. I gave it the best push I could. You got 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I think you did a fantastic job at the start of the show. First, I want to say thanks to you guys for having me on. I really appreciate it. I always love talking Eagles, and this was a really good chance to come on and talk with you guys about it. So I appreciate the opportunity. As far as our stuff, my co-host and I, we do the True North Fantasy Football podcast. You can find that on all of your favorite platforms, and you can check us out on Twitter at TrueNorthFFB. And don't forget to visit the website at TrueNorthFFB.com. But fantasy football aside, I'm really excited for the Eagles this season, and I want them to hit that playoff push hard after this bye week.
Gotta do this. Who is your big play in fantasy going forward? We know the fantasy football playoffs are coming up. If you have this guy on your team, who is it that you want to have on your team for that push and that playoff run?
Yeah, well, I think the Superflex format has risen pretty huge the past couple of seasons. And for me, the biggest player that I've gotten benefit out of is Lamar Jackson. And I think we kind of saw what he can do this past week against the New England Patriots. That was an amazing game by him.
Absolutely.
I think one quarterback leagues, it's a little bit different, but Superflex is pretty huge. And I play in a lot of those leagues. And Lamar Jackson has been just like a locked in piece to some of my rosters. And he's really helped supplement maybe some deficiencies elsewhere. So Lamar Jackson is my guy.
Yeah, I'm going Dalvin Cook, man. I've rode him in some leagues. He is becoming a league winner for me in a few of my leagues because I grabbed him in probably three-quarters of my league. So I'm continuing to ride Dalvin Cook down the stretch because I don't think that production's changing. So I'm just gonna hold my breath on that one.
Yeah, I love
But
that.
you
That pick's
definitely have a good
man.
one with Lamar Jackson too. So again, Travis, thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to rate and review the podcast. Follow us at ANY Podcast. Follow me at Connor10. Follow the True North Fantasy Football Podcast and that group, and check out that website. They do some awesome work. And me and LJ will be back later this week. We're going to do a bye-week episode because we can never get enough of Eagles football, and we're going to do a mid-season awards show kind of thing for the fans and for the followers. So we'll be doing that later this week. But again, Travis, thank you so much, and have a great night.
Yeah, take it easy, man. Go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.
A fighting man I used to be, revered and feared through Killarney. Now I'm back to hitching with the wind. But if Mickey Flynn should ever find me, I'll throw me caution all behind me and square off on that son of a bitch again. He cracked open a river too, he beat me Sunday through and through, and such eager my unconscious frame. I won me healthy sheriff fights, well lucky son, still happy life since Mickey Flynn beat me dumb and lame.